Shavua Tov Parshat Emor. Where are the Kohanim when you need them, especially at the end of the Parsha? What am I referring to? The beginning of the Parsha tells us the rules of Kohanim, the priests who are to serve in the tabernacle. They're not allowed to become ritually defiled by contact with a dead body, except for immediate relatives, and in the case of the Cohen Gadol, the high priest, not at all. And they're also not allowed to marry basically two types of women, women of ill repute, a zonah or a halala, or a gerusha, divorcee. They're not allowed to marry divorced women either. Okay, that's the beginning of the Parsha. What's at the end of the Parsha? Well, there's a story. It's a sad story about the son of a woman from the tribe of Dan, and this boy's father was the Egyptian, an Egyptian man. The rabbis say the Egyptian that Moses killed back in Egypt when he saw him smiting an Israelite. So this son of a mixed marriage, if you will, gets into a big fight in the midst of the camp with an Israelite man. And as the tempers flare, he then blasphemes. We will use the euphemism and say he blesses God's name, and I mean the opposite because it's inappropriate to say. He blesses God's name, and he will be, at the end, stoned. I'm not referring to the illegal type of getting stoned. He got killed by the punishment of stoning. A tragic story. Where were the Kohanim when this final story took place? That's the question I want to answer. And why is this story here? Well, one possible simple explanation of why the story is here is it could be a cautionary tale. You see, we mentioned at the beginning that Kohanim are not allowed to marry women of low morals or divorcees. That we see that the impact of a spouse and the impact of parents on character is very profound. Therefore, the Kohen has to be on a higher level. He cannot have low morals in his household, and he cannot have contentiousness. We will assume that the divorcee is a possible source of disunity, of fighting, and a Kohen has to be above that. Obviously, not every divorce is equal. Sometimes it's the man's fault, sometimes it's the woman's fault, but in order to make sure that there's no chance of it being part of the Kohen's life, this kind of fighting and discord, therefore the Torah prohibits a Kohen from marrying a divorcee, period. And it could be that the end of the story is a cautionary tale about the importance of parenting, because this man was the son of an Egyptian, not any Egyptian, a bad one, the one who was smiting the Israelite. So he had bad upbringing, and as a result, he had a tragic end. He blasphemed. He blessed God's name, as it were. And so therefore it could be a cautionary tale. But I think there's something far more important here. Because who are the Kohanim and what is their job? Well, the Torah starts off saying an obvious fact. The Kohanim, Bnei Aharon, the sons of Aharon. We know that. Why tell me the Kohanim, Bnei Aharon? Are there other Kohanim? And the answer perhaps is yes. You see, when the Israelites were to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai, God says to them, Atem tihiu li mamlechet Kohanim v'goy kadosh. You shall be for me a kingdom of Kohanim, of priests, and a holy nation. So in a sense, we are all Kohanim. But there are special Kohanim, the priests of the priests, if you will, who are the descendants of Aharon. There are certain services of God that only the Bnei Aharon, only the descendants of Aharon can fulfill, specifically the sacrifices and everything that has to do with the tabernacle or the temple. But there are also certain functions that not just the descendants of Aaron can fulfill, but we all have within us a kehunah, a sort of priesthood that we can also fulfill. And most specifically, I refer to the role of being a peacemaker. The rabbis teach us in the Mishnah, be of the students of Aharon. Love peace, pursue peace, love people, and bring them close to Torah. This service of God, making peace, is something that we all have the power and the responsibility to do. But this also explains why the Kohen is not allowed to become ritually defiled. Because, first of all, the connection to anything physical is when trouble starts. The more spiritual a person is, the more of a peacemaker they are, because in the spiritual realms, there aren't the divisions that there are in the physical realms. And therefore, a person who is spiritual is able to rise up above these things. So therefore, becoming in contact with a dead body brings one down to the lowest of the physical world. And it's only allowed for a regular Kohen for immediate relatives, and for a Kohen Gadol, not at all. They must always be on the spiritual life, closer to heaven than to earth. And second of all, their character must be above reproach. They cannot marry a zonah, a prostitute, or a halala, which is the offspring of a forbidden marriage to Kohanim, or a gerusha, a divorced woman, because perhaps she may bring fight and discord into the home and into the character of the children growing up in that home. The Kohen has to be above all that. Talmidei Chachamim, say the rabbis, great scholars, marbim shalom be'olam, they increase peace in the world because they are spiritual. They rise above all of these divisions. That is the job of every Kohen, whether they are the descendant of Aharon or whether they are the members of Am Yisrael, Kulo, all of Am Yisrael we have within us, that role of the Kohen to fulfill, to be the peacemakers. We need to be spiritual people who bring peace. There is no higher calling. And that perhaps is what was missing at the end of the Parsha in this tragic story. What was this fight about that this son of the Egyptian was fighting with the Israelite man in the midst of the camp? Well, the rabbis tell us that the son of this Egyptian man was also the son of the woman from the tribe of Dan. And he wanted to pitch his tent in the tribe of Dan's area. He wanted to live where his mother's family was. He didn't have family so much in Israel other than his mother's family. And this Israelite man, whose name is not mentioned in the Torah, and that's significant because he is also blameworthy. This man said to him basically, you can't live in our neighborhood. We don't want you and your kind here. My heart goes out to this son of the Egyptian man. Obviously, he was not justified in what he did. Nonetheless, he certainly was treated badly, I would say. And I think this reminds me of the famous Talmudic tale, which we often discuss on the 9th of Av, of Tisha B'Av. The rabbis say, what was Jerusalem destroyed because of? The story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. What is that story? Well, briefly, there was a very wealthy man who was friends with Kamsa and enemies with Bar Kamsa, and he invited, through his servant, Kamsa to a joyous feast. The servant got confused and invited Bar Kamsa instead. And Bar Kamsa thinking, oh, this wealthy man wants to reconcile with me. Great, I'll go to the feast. And he shows up at the feast. And then the man sees Bar Kamsa there instead of Kamsa, and he gets furious. And in front of everybody, he says, you get out. And no amount of entreaties from Bar Kamsa would change his mind. He insisted, even though Bar Kamsa offered to pay for the meal, you get out. And there were some rabbis present who were silent, didn't say a thing. And Bar Kamsa sees them and he says, since these rabbis are silent, they are acquiescing in my public humiliation. Well, I'm going to get them back. And he goes to the Romans and he says to the Romans, the Jews have rebelled against you. Just try to send a sacrifice with me to the temple. The Jews won't offer it up. Okay, they sent him and he took the animal and put a slight blemish in the animal's eye, something which would disqualify the animal for being allowed to be brought as a sacrifice on the altar in the temple. Now, the Kohanim, when they saw Bar Kamsa with this animal, they knew immediately what had happened. They understood the whole plot, and they asked a certain Rabbi Zechariah, what should we do? Should we offer the sacrifice anyway? And he says, no, you can't. It's got a blemish, not allowed. Well, then, should we kill Bar Kamsa and conceal the whole thing so we don't have a war? No, says Rabbi Zechariah, you can't kill someone for putting a blemish in a sacrifice. People will say that putting a blemish in a sacrifice is a capital offense. It is not. And so they did nothing, and the temple was destroyed. Now, who's the guilty party in this particular story, right? The first thing to note is that Kamsa doesn't even show up in the story. He's the guy who was supposed to be invited, but by mistake wasn't. He doesn't even show up. So we'll leave him out. It's interesting. One would say, well, perhaps. Obviously, the first suspect is Bar Kamsa. He's the one who went and told on the Romans. Granted, he was the victim of public humiliation, just like the son of the Egyptian man. And it happened betoch hamachaneh, in the midst of the camp, and in the case of the Talmud story, it happened in the middle of a big feast with all of the rabbis there. Same thing. Lots of parallels there. So certainly Bar Kamsa would be our prime suspect. Or perhaps the one who made the feast, who hated Bar Kamsa so much that he humiliated him. And he plays the role of the Israelite man who attacks the son of the Egyptian man in this story. But the rabbis don't put the blame on either of those people. Of course, we can. But the rabbis point at Rabbi Zechariah, the rabbi that they asked in the temple, who wouldn't let them kill Bar Kamsa or offer up the sacrifice. They say they don't blame him personally, they blame his humility. Anvatanuto, his humility caused the temple to be destroyed. What? He seems to be the most innocent one in the whole story. He was asked a question, he did his job, he answered the question. The answer is he was supposed to be a Cohen, a priest. A priest is a peacemaker. Cohen is an oseh shalom. And how does a Cohen make peace? Well, we have a little hint. A few weeks ago, we read about leprosy, that the job of the Cohen is to see somebody who has tzara'at. Tzara'at, leprosy, comes from antisocial behavior, from speaking lashon hara. And he sends the leper out of the camp to think, to heal, to change. And then the leper can come back in and live together with society. That's what needed to happen here. That somebody, some Kohen, even if it's not a Kohen ben Aharon, needed to say to this Ben Mitzri and Ben Yisraeli, get out of the camp. Let's talk this over. Let's resolve it. Rabbi Zechariah in the temple should have said to Bar Kamsa, let's go to the side. Let's get out of the temple, out of the machaneh. Let's talk. Even at the meal, somebody should have gotten up and said to the Balabayit and to Bar Kamsa, let's not have this fight here in the midst of the camp. Nobody will concede. Everybody is clamoring, fighting for public support. Let's go out. Let's talk. Let's make peace. That's the job of a Kohen. We are to be the students of Aharon. Ohev Shalom, love peace, pursue peace, love people, bring them close to Torah. We are to rise up above the pettiness of our disagreements and to see the big picture and to be spiritual and bring peace. Each person. Oseh Shalom b'mamav, we conclude our prayers. God who makes peace in heaven between the water and the fire that are in Shemayim, two opposites that can't coexist, but God makes peace. Ya'aseh Shalom aleinu, that may that God make peace on us. V'al kol Yisrael, and all Israel v'imru. Amen.